2, 1. Hey, and we are live, and I'm only a measly 13 minutes late. Yay! Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Well, this thing is like cursed, which is a good theme for, I guess, trying to interview during the quarantine. As you can see, like, I don't have my fancy, you can see my green screen and my light behind me because OBS hates me and doesn't really want to use any of my cameras. But that's fine. We persevere. How is everybody?
Good, but I can't get people back. Ah, there we go.
What happened? Can't get, in Zoom. Anyway, welcome. My name is Rando, and I would like to welcome my guest once again from our last episode on trying to find a gig in the virus economy, Mr. Mike Murray. And we have also Joe and Kathleen and one of my favorite people, Wolf Gerlich. Is it Gerlich or am I mispronouncing it?
I'm so favorite you don't even pronounce my name right. What the hell?
I don't even know why I attempted to do that.
You actually got it right, but still.
It's just my name he mispronounces.
I should kick you out of the Zoom. This is awful. That's okay. It's kind of passive aggressive on my part because people have spent 38 years mispronouncing mine. Well, hello everybody. Welcome back. Glad we finally got this going for everybody.
Good to be here, man. We're all excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I really wanted to expand on what we had talked about before about trying to find not only thinking is it a good idea to try to find a gig in this economy, is it smart, is it safe, and that kind of thing. But say you get past all that, say you actually get this gig, and now, as opposed to, I'm sure a lot of us have been used to getting flown out for interviews and maybe having, like, depending on where your gig is, if it's in your home city, maybe, even better, but that's a whole new thing. But we're used to that. That is a known quantity of having to be on site and, not without its own nerve-wracking things. But what is it like now where you can't really get, especially for people like me that need the vibe in the room, that need to watch actual, you can kind of get body language a little bit, but look at all, we're all shoulders down for right now. And we know we're on camera. We know there's at least 2 other people besides the 5 of us that are going to watch this. So, like, how do you prepare for that? How do you prepare for what would be a solely, remote loop right now? Mike, do you think that this changes a whole lot for people having to be remote? Would you imagine it would be easier, harder? What's your take on it?
No, it's harder. And I think we're all in this boat. So I'm in the middle of, I'm actually working with a recruiting firm right now on a position that we're hiring. And I had this conversation a few weeks ago with the recruiters who are fantastic at what they do. And I said, okay, guys, so almost the same question you just asked. Like, how do we do this? Normally I would take the person out to dinner and we would sit for hours and we'd whiteboard and all these things that you do when you're in person. And the recruiter said, well, Mike, it comes down to this. You either take the risk or you don't. And I was, thanks, guys. That's super helpful. But do it or not, that's useful. But I think we're all muddling through. I don't think any of us are good at this. We evolved as humans to be good at face-to-face things, not good at staring at a screen and trying to interpret character and responses from this lack of actual information fidelity.
Yeah, like, it's like getting that piece of advice is like basically is that just a Yoda, like, do or do not, there is no try, like,
basically.
Thank you for that sage piece of wisdom. So when you're up against this, my first rule, I would think, is absolutely put on pants. Could be like that. That's a bit tongue in cheek, but like, I don't know. You never know when a camera's gonna fall. This stupid thing.
Or you're
which-
going to have to get up and get the door because there's a delivery.
Yeah, this stupid thing is currently not working, and as you can see, it is on a tripod, which constantly falls over if I like swipe my big fat arm somewhere. And if I'm on an interview, at least I have my side camera that has actually like a pretty good angle right now. You know, like all of a sudden it's like, okay, well there's that. Yeah, right. And like, what if like planning for your kids running in or anything like that? What would you think are some of the things that that maybe people could practice or try to work on, Kathleen, to get used to this very impersonal, what's meant to be like a very in-person type of loop?
So the first, and I think that we're all exploring this right now when we're sheltering in place, is boundaries. If you have a really big interview coming up, really just sort of talk to those around you and sort of explain you're going to be nervous. You need to have some quiet. No coming in and asking daddy or mommy to help you with your homework, that, that there's boundaries. And I think that that helps us not only in interviewing, but what we're doing right now. The other is practice. I think that the challenge is even in face-to-face interviews, we don't prepare, we don't practice the questions, we don't research enough about what's going to happen. We just sort of walk in like, hey, if the vibe works, what works? And that's not fair to the person who's interviewing you. And that's not fair to you because you're not giving it a concerted effort of researching, what do you want to ask that person and how do you want to practice being on a virtual interview? Do mock interviews with your buddies or something like that, because none of us got, right out of the chute really great at this. We all had to work on our lighting and such. But I think we actually have an opportunity to have better notes available during a virtual interview, which we really don't want in face to face, but down so you can have sticky notes around your laptop and maybe have a sticky note to make sure that you're making eye contact, because we can still do eye contact with virtual interviews. We can still have some body language of being interested rather than looking all around here. So I think we have more space to be able to have really good interviews. And I think also being empathetic, because we're also really great at technology. But I just did a webinar with someone this morning who is trying to literally drag all of these hiring managers into virtual interviewing. And the hiring managers are so used to judging culture fit by judging body language and judging how they present themselves. And that is their fail safe. They have to bid on how successful that person is going to be as part of the team. And now they're like playing with a whole new set of tools that they've never had to play with before. So you really have to be empathetic as far as how they're struggling with this new technology and how to get your personality across to them. Joe, at our last session, you had some really great, experiences that you've had and some really great suggestions. I know you were frustrated with a few folks, but you also had some great suggestions. What were those?
So I think probably the biggest one, and it's strange, like I've been running through kind of in my head, like what's some of the best things to keep in mind. And it's a lot of the same advice for in-person interviews, just more so because you don't have those normal social cues. So it's over communicate even more than you normally would. Always talk about what's on your mind. You're trying to, as you mentioned, convey personality to someone who is not really in their comfort zone right now either. So like that's kind of some of them. I'd say the other big one, this was from I did one last loop between the last discussion and now. And one other one is if someone is asking you kind of for a negative experience you've had in your career, be careful about that. They can't judge to what degree you're being candid, to what degree kind of you can't in turn judge whether or not they're asking that in good faith or they're asking that because they want the loop to be over and they want to get back to their day job.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the other one, is just generally assume you're not going to have social cues you'd normally expect. If you start getting asked questions that normally you'd expect social cues on, be careful, and and kind of think through like, why are they asking me this? What information are they trying to get from me? And tailor your response to that rather than just being like, oh, it's just a person on the internet, I can say whatever. It's no, you really can't.
And be prepared for what just happened 3 seconds
Mhm.
ago. His
Mhm.
camera freezing, and that is, I don't care who you are. I have been, I did radio for a good many years. I've done streaming for quite a bit now. I've given talks in front of people. There is nothing that throws me off my game more. I don't care if somebody came in with a Nerf gun arsenal and started pelting me with projectiles. Nothing throws me off my game more than broken audio. Like, then you have to get a whole stream of consciousness back, and you're about to make a really great point, and then forget about the fact that when you finally get it back, you have to reestablish who heard what last, and like that's a whole game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the other people I dealt with on that loop, that most recent loop as well, is they had a really bad internet connection. So they were trying to ask a lot of kind of detailed personality questions, and then stuff just kept cutting out. And
Yeah,
It's
I've
hard.
had so many interviews lately, and I feel so badly for the person on the other end because they're trying so hard, be it the interviewer or the interviewee, and it's totally out of their control. And we are talking to people who are in a situation that is already out of control. So I had a 6 dumpster day today, and the biggest issue is things out of our control. So when you get into these tense situations, and then there's one more thing we can't control, the frustration level is out the roof. So patients just say, maybe we should reschedule. Totally fine with rescheduling, because even in face-to-face interviews, somebody gets sick, you get a car accident, something like that. It's totally cool to say, hey, I'm not at my best. My technology's not at my best. Any chance we can reschedule?
Well, I'm gonna make an assumption here that you've interviewed quite a few people in your time, right? You've been on that side of the table.
Yes.
So, what do you think, as an experienced interviewer, what do you think you have to compensate for, or how do you have to change your tactics when you now? Do you prefer like interviewing even before all this, interviewing people over the phone, over video, whatever, or do you prefer to have them in front of you?
Oh, I'm old school. I prefer to have them in front of me. So part of it is I do reverse interviews, which I know I'm not supposed to do. So Kathleen, please close your ears. Because any recruiter I've ever worked with has yelled at me about my interview style. So generally, by the time someone gets to me, I'm confident that they've been vetted technically. They've been vetted, in a couple of different ways. So I'm just like, hey, open book. You got a half hour, go. What do you want to know? And it's oftentimes the questions that they ask me indicate to me their culture, where their mindset is, what they view the personality from. So, I think that's there is definitely some things I need to compensate for. And part of it is too, there was a bit of research that just came out, and they're calling this Zoom fatigue. So I think Zoom is just getting dogpiled from everybody, but scientists have coined this term of Zoom fatigue because what they found was that it takes anywhere from 20 to 30% more brain power in terms of energy.
That's why I'm so freaking tired.
It is. That's the exact article. You should check it out, because it takes a lot more to navigate the social cues, back to what Mike was saying about how we're not wired for video, to navigate the audio, like Danny, you were bringing up. And because of that, yes. I think the takeaway here is, if you're an interviewer, you got to adapt. You got to be more empathetic. You got to allow for more space. If you're an interviewee, we're used to, prepare, let's say, half hour, double that. We're used to give yourself, 5 minutes in the car before you walk in to catch your breath. Double that. Oftentimes for my most critical calls, even today when I'm not interviewing, just talking with, my peers and with customers, I'll put aside the half hour before and I'll just get into a zone and do nothing to build up that energy reserve.
Which is a lot easier when you could be in your own car alone in a parking lot versus I need some time alone in the house. Which, oh, by the way, my office is now the kitchen table, and the only thing I have is a broom closet to go sit in. And please don't bother me until the kid comes knocking on the door. Which is a whole host of other things. So being able to keep your cool, and I imagine it's. I don't imagine it's easy for people who are the interviewers. They're dealing with their own stuff too. I don't know. So maybe play into that. If you're going to be an interviewee, assume they might be a little flustered too. So, don't freak out that much. Let's talk about general interview tips, right? Because we're very virus heavy right now, virus economy heavy. But the fundamentals still I don't think change when it comes to interviews. Mike, I'm going to get to you in 1 second. I don't want to lose this thought. Tell me more, Wolf, about that reverse interview thing. You let them ask, you don't ask them anything?
I won't. I don't have any questions.
Oh, I'd hate to talk to you. That's awful.
Well, yes. However, so when I was running an apprenticeship, for every one person we hired, we would go through 55 qualified applicants. So we would interview a ton of people. And mind you, we put 67 people through this program. So do the math, lots of interviews. And the let me ask you about your greatest strengths. Let me ask you about your greatest weaknesses. I would want to not go on too much further with that. So I would just open it up and say, what questions do you have about working here, about working with me, about working with the team, about cybersecurity? And quite frankly, it was more revealing for me in terms of culture fit and personality, the questions they asked, than any questions I would have asked.
How many times did you get just a dog in the headlights view of I didn't come with any questions?
Oh yeah, frequently. But that is important too, because if you think about insecurity, we oftentimes don't know the answer. The ability to tap dance a little bit, to vamp. I don't know the right word to use here, but the ability to just go, I'm on the spot, let me come up with something is in and of itself a key skill. So that pause of, I don't have anything, but then rolling into it and building rapport, oh man, golden.
Right.
Hired.
And that's something that you, even in face-to-face interviews, you should be able to walk into any interview and have at least 3 questions about the culture, 3 questions about the responsibilities that you have, 3 questions about, the mistakes that you're going to be allowed to make or not be able to make. You should have several sets of questions within each category. Like, what is the team going to be like? What is a disaster day look like? Is every day a disaster like? So this is the challenge that I've had with many candidates who go in and talk to managers. They're like, they leave the interviewer in the driver's seat, and that's not the position. It should either be a partnership or the candidate should be the driver, as far as, I'm interviewing you and I want to know, is this really where I want to be spending 80% of my time?
Yeah. Speaking of this, I have a 4-year-old, which with my camera angle you can see the door open, then the door close, and some squealing as he goes in the corner. And my wife dutifully coming in trying to get him out of the room, please. Live doing things. Thank you.
Oh, come on! I want you to color his hair.
Well, no, we are. We're gonna color and bleach it later. And then just like that train of thought that I just had to go over something. If it was a high stakes, need this gig type interview, I would be on the floor right now in a fetal position. Mike, what's your just overall? I assume you haven't always been the big shot you are now, whining and dining and wheeling and dealing and all of those things.
You
It's-
walked into
it's-
that one.
I did walk into that one.
It's hard to
I heard that one.
believe. It's hard to believe from your high-rise apartment drinking wine on a very prestigious podcast that you were at one point among the rank and file. What's your worst interview story? Like, have you ever had any that you're just
God.
like, I'm gonna jump off a building?
Oh, this is how long is this stream?
we have about
How long
20
are we
more-
gonna go?
We have 30 more minutes. Go for it.
So I actually, just before I answer that, because I've got many answers to that, there's one thing I wanted to throw in on the last conversation, because Will's totally right. And by the way, Danny, if you hate interviewing with him, you'd hate me more, because I do a lot of the same things, but I ask. So I learned a long time ago, and actually we should swap notes, because I used to do those mass interviews, and I found over time the thing, like the canned answers were really the thing that drove me nuts. So I got into this habit of trying to break candidates of their canned answers and get them into a place where I could find the real person, right? Every single person in the world has an answer to, tell me about your greatest weakness. Oh, I'm a perfectionist. Like, and until you get past that, you don't really know who the human is behind it. And so most of my interview tactics are about the human and finding the person behind it. And Will's example of just letting them talk is actually a really wonderful one. But what I was going to throw in is, I think this is the time, as both an interviewer and an interviewee, not to do any of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to do the tricky things that we do in person, because we're used to having this high fidelity information. And to go back to basics, I've gone back to straight behavioral interviewing. Tell me about a time when X, and really just the sort of like straight stuff, because everyone's got this extra layer of stress that already makes it hard for them.
Mhm.
If you just start breaking people, like I tend to in interviews, and this is where I'm going to answer your question, then everything just falls apart, because we don't have the same, resiliency that we usually have. But so in my early career, especially when I was an engineer, I'm totally embarrassed telling this story, and I'm, please don't judge me. I learned the hard way. I used to be the hardest interviewer possible. And it was with the idea that if you could survive an interview where you just got brutalized, then you somehow earned your stripes or some bullshit like that.
You're a
Apologies for the
monster.
language. Oh no, I was a monster. It was bad enough that people used to actually come. We used to do group interviews. People used to come to interviews I did to watch. and there are, and if any of you are watching, I'm so friggin' sorry for the way I acted like 15 years ago. I've had so many people cry in interviews for various reasons I can't even count. And I learned over the years that was just the absolute worst thing you could possibly do. And I was just a terrible human being around the way I interviewed people in the old days. And so I have a lot of terrible stories around, to the question that you just asked, like, people just freezing in interviews and just stopping talking for like 10 minutes. I've seen everything you can imagine, tears, people who got up and like went to the bathroom and never came back. Like I every bad date story you've ever heard, I've seen in an interview.
Oh man, have I got some bad date stories.
That's a whole nother show, Kathleen.
A whole nother episode.
I will add to that I think that must be like a point in time, right, where that seemed like the right idea.
Mhm.
Because in the late 90s, early aughts, that was my interview style too. I want to crush them, because if you can survive me, you will survive your clients.
It lasted well past that at Microsoft. That was like all the ASAPs, basically. That was their interview style, was I'm going to try and make the candidate cry. If the candidate doesn't cry, they're doing okay.
Yeah.
So I ran into a guy in 2004, and those of you who are on this know my commitment and passion around the community. Those of you who are watching, I really care a lot about the hacker community, the wider tech community. So I ran into a guy at an event, and he was serving the food, and nothing wrong with that, but I was like, don't I know you? And he goes, yeah, you interviewed me a few years ago. I'm like, oh, what happened? He goes, Well, I walked out of that interview realizing I had no reason to stay in tech. I did not belong. I would never cut it.
Oh,
You really opened my eyes. I'm like,
Dude.
Dude.
Oh.
terrible. So
I want to cry.
Karma's a
listening to this.
bitch.
one of the things that I'm really proud of with my current employer is one of our core values is be kinder than necessary. And that completely carries into the interview process. And if you really want to get to the person behind, like Mike was saying, you've got to reduce the stress a bit. It's not helpful.
Yeah.
And here was something I was going to get back to, is something that Kathleen had said, of a big way to de-stress that is to realize that, yeah, it is not just a you versus that. Like, it's not just you having to follow their lead. If you're not actively steering that conversation, I can't count how many interviews I had over the years where the person interviewing me either like wasn't the original person, not the actual manager, didn't really know, so he's asking me about things that I have no knowledge of. But then I realize I have to spin this. Everything I get asked, and this takes practice of trying to be like agile enough to spin it to a strength. Like, well, I'm not too sure about that, but let me try to get to the actual spirit of, it's like following the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, of guiding that conversation. And a skilled person can do that. You will run up against people probably like old Mike and old Wolf, who will be like, no, peasant, I am the master here. But spin that as best you can. It's kind of like going to like buy a car, right? Like, people go in thinking that like, I'm just going to pay sticker and they're the boss. I mean, if you're there for 8 hours, like, you got to haggle a little bit, and you got to realize that it should be a symbiotic relationship of trying to get as much of your point across as possible.
I think there's a question that none of us ask nearly often enough, which is, what are you trying to learn from this question? And it's a question that I actually ask myself as I'm doing it, and I will often stop and explain these days. In the old days, I would just brutalize people just for fun. Today, I actually, you'll find if you interview with me and I'm doing something tricky, which I do a lot of really things that I have questions that I've asked every interview candidate for the last 15 years. I have 2 questions that I will ask everybody because I've heard pretty much every possible answer at this point. And I know what those answers translate to in the world. But in the old days, I would just ask weird questions and people would just be, people either answer them or they wouldn't. Now I stop and I explain to them what I'm trying to learn from the question, what I'm looking for, and sort of what the bounds on that are, so that it de-stresses, right? I think, there's a lot of research on psychological safety being the key to performance in teams and organizations. And I think nowhere is that more important to demonstrate to someone than in an interview. Because you're teaching them that your company is a safe place to work. But also, you're not going to see who they truly are unless you're able to give them a safe environment in which to express themselves.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties it. That ties in with kind of what I mentioned earlier, though, of when you get asked one of those really tricky interpersonal questions, try and figure out, what are they trying to accomplish? Are they asking in good faith? What is it they're hoping to get out of you from that question, instead of just telling them a story and then finding out like, oh, well, that's how I tanked my interview.
So it's also understanding that it's an iterative process, and being really good workflow professionals saying, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. The recruiter that you work with, the direct recruiter that you work with, is going to walk you through the process of interviewing with them. And then part of their job is to make sure that you are prepared for the next stage. You need to ask them, okay, who is the next person I'm going to meet? Who is the next person I'm going to interview? Where do they fit in the chain? What am I supposed to, what am I going to get out of that interview? And also ask at that beginning, how many different interviews are going to happen? Because in face-to-face, you would have been told there's the phone screen, the text screen, and then you're coming in for 8 days, 8 hours, 8 days if you're
8 days.
8 days if you're interviewing
You're
as Mike,
sleeping
but
here.
Yeah.
8 hours. I don't think your cat would appreciate that. No.
There's a cot in the basement. Grab the broom.
Yeah. You then do the phone screen, you do the tech interview, you do maybe a program manager interview, you then would do a face-to-face and maybe a panel interview, a whiteboard interview. So really ask at the beginning of this process, what are all the different interviews I'm going to be doing? And who are they going to be with? And where do they fit within the cycle of the decision making? And are any of the people that I'm going to be interviewing with going to be people I'm actually going to work with, or are they people I'm going to report to? You need to have that schematic in your mind so that you can lay sort of the plan down. Now, if you're working with a staffing firm, it's completely different. They're going to prep you for what's happening as far as their client relationship with that person. And then you're going to have to keep asking that questions like, where am I in the process? Who else am I going to be meeting with? Where are they within the process? And great staffing firms, and there's many of them out there, will prep you on each one of those steps. If it's a staffing firm that's not doing that, well, you then have your answer.
What's what are some of the ways? And I'll go to Joe for this one, but this is for everybody. What are some of your own tells of when the candidate is losing you or losing your interest? Because there's been a couple interviews I've been on where it was just not my day. It just like nothing was going right, and I'm trying to course correct and do this, and then I start noticing like little universal tells like shoulder slumping or like maybe a little more active pen tapping or something, and trying to decipher if that's their nature or if I'm just losing them completely, and can I pull it back?
So tells as a candidate or tells as an interviewer? Because I've done probably at least 50 interviews too.
Tells, yeah, no, like tells as an interviewer, like if I'm if I'm somebody that's going to go interviewing right now and I'm listening to this and I say, well, like, and I think, well, how do I know if I'm doing well mid interview? Like, how can I tell if I'm losing these people, if I'm losing their interest, or I'm screwing this up? Like, is there anything that you do as an interviewer subconsciously where, like, I don't know, putting your head in your hands? Or...
What I would say is I try and remain professional and interested, regardless of how well the candidate's doing, just because that's the responsible professional thing to do. But that's not most interviewers.
No.
If the phone comes out, you're in trouble.
Has that happened to you? Have you ever grabbed your phone out and be like, I wonder what's on Twitter?
Like, yeah, that's really a bad sign.
Ooh,
generally,
Mike Murray just tweeted.
Yeah, exactly. But again, yeah, other ones like
interview, and
yeah, but again, yeah, like the pen tapping. Like if someone seems to be losing their patience or seems to be distracted, and isn't paying full attention to what you're doing as opposed to actively staying engaged. Another sign that you're not doing great is the exact opposite. The interviewer is seeming to become significantly more engaged than what you'd expect. They're trying to help you. They're switching from interviewer mode to kind of teacher mode.
Oh, I've had those.
And it's essentially, sometimes they're doing this in good faith. They want to help you and you're doing well enough, you'll pass the interview. But other times this is just, they don't want you to have a bad experience and feel like you completely failed, and are just trying to help you out so you don't leave crying.
But wait, hang on. I actually, I'm gonna throw a counterpoint in here, because I think it's really, I know all of you on this call, Joe, I know you the least, but I think this is a true statement of most of us. Most of the best people that I know in this industry have a really good, solid, well-developed case of imposter syndrome. And I'm definitely one of them. And I think some of you have something similar. And I think that this is the most dangerous thing for people with imposter syndrome, because if you're sitting there trying to evaluate, it's the old Kenny Rogers, you never count your cards at the table, right? There'll be time enough for counting later. if you're sitting there trying to figure out how you're doing, you're going to interpret every sign. So FYI, I have pulled my phone out during an interview. Absolutely. When I got a text message from a family member or saw something hit my Apple Watch that like, oh my God, the entire system is down. We need to go. Like,
Sure.
you know, things happen that don't mean anything. Or I might just be having a complete shit day and I might look completely distracted and disinterested, but you might be killing it, right? You might be having the absolute interview of your life and I'm just off. And if you sit there and are doing the internal thing where you're like, man, he's looking at his watch, he's looking at his phone, I must be fucking this up, I suck. And then you just like crater, that's the worst case scenario. Like, I think you have to go into it with just like almost sort of blind belief that it's going to be fine. And then you can worry about it afterwards. Would be my thought there.
I think that's the best advice I can also say is that these might be signs that you think of after the fact of how did that go, and then you can go curl up in the fetal position, but you don't get to do that till after the interviews are done.
I'm mentally curling up right now because I can remember very clearly those very helpful interviews where I thought, oh, they must like me and like they're trying to teach me and I'm going to get, and then just never hearing back from them ever again. Thinking, well, they were so nice and they were so, oh, okay. Yeah, I see how that went. I wasn't gonna drink tonight. Now I think I am.
Are we bringing back nightmares? I'm sorry that we're bringing back nightmares. I think that, because I know that we need to wind this down in 10 minutes, and none of us can, keep our comments short because we all have such great things to offer. I think really right now in virtual interviewing is understanding your own stress level and understanding the interviewer's stress level. There are all these really great practices of researching ahead of time and having all of your questions and practicing and researching, but really having empathy for yourself and empathy for the person who's interviewing you. I'm wondering, does anyone want to share their worst story of being an interviewee?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, Well, so I have a doozy, but I'll save mine. So who else wants to go first?
I'm going to start. So I was working my third job and it was just god awful. And I really, really wanted this other job. And I got called in for the interview and I was so excited. And I mixed up the name of the company with what the real company was that I was interviewing for.
Whoops. And
I walked in and I was like, so I'm really excited about working for XYZ company and it's work on such and such technology. And they went, we're ABC company.
You pretty much just
I didn't get another question. They're like, you can leave now. Like, oh.
Mike,
and I had to go back to my really, really shit job. Anyway. Who wants to go next?
Mike.
No, don't put me on the spot. I'm actually having trouble coming up with a good one.
Oh, because you're just so great. All right, Hotshot.
No, not at all. Actually, I think I might be having trouble coming up, like picking one.
Wolf.
So yeah, I don't have a lot of them. I think the worst that I had was probably 2010. I was looking to get a position as a director. And it's more, when you think director, you think more like strategic, more management, those sort of things. So I showed up and it was for a dental firm. So right away I should have known that this was going sideways, but I show up and I'm having a conversation with them and they kept bringing it back to very, very technical things. So they'd be like, what do you think we should do about our perimeter? I'm like, well, you have multiple locations and, most organizations have moved away from dedicated circuits to VPNs. And of course, service mesh is coming out, or whatever it was called in 2010, and sort of the right term. But and they go, no. I mean, like on a sonic wall. And right away, one dentist, anytime they talk about sonic wall as an enterprise firewall. On a sonic firewall, how would you get in and configure blah, blah, blah? I'm like, oh, what? So every single time that we would start to talk director level, they would be like, okay, that's fine. But so if you're running cat cable, what kind of cat cable would you run? I'm like, running cat cable? What kind of position is this? and I got out, and I was, I had a headhunter who was doing this, and they got on the phone. They're like, well, they think that you're not hands-on or practical enough. I'm like, I think they don't know what a director of
Yeah.
IT security does.
Yeah, what are you going to be crawling the ceiling? I'm director of cabling.
I've got no idea. So yay Cat 5e. I don't know. But I think to the lesson there is in part what Kathleen was saying, but making sure you don't have a mismatch between your idea of what the position is and their idea.
Joe, do you have a particular fail story you want to?
I've got a pretty good one. So it was a place I tried to intern back in college. And when I did my internship interview, essentially went well. They said, we don't care about your GPA because you went to Caltech. Unfortunately, we filled the role already, but we really want you to come back and interview for full-time next year. I come back next year and I do the interview loop. First thing they ask me is my GPA. I tell them, and I've realized now I basically am going to be wasting the next 4 hours because of the look I got when they asked my GPA. So they switched from not caring about GPA to caring between that time. And it's just like, oh, that's not going well.
Yeah. And then like, well, this is gonna be a good vacation for me to take.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike, have you come up with one yet?
Yeah, so Wolf's reminded me of my actual least. I think I pushed this one out of my mind because I still have some emotional scarring about this one.
Fair.
Mine wasn't a director interview; it was a CISO interview, and got through the entire interview process. And this company, it's a very well-known Bay Area company, had a policy where everyone that they were interviewing had to come in and work there for 2 full days. And so I got there and showed up on day 1, and they said, we want you to make a plan, like you would if you were CISO here. All right, so sounds good. Let's, let me go talk to all of the key stakeholders and do all the things that you would do as a CISO. And I get to the end of the process and I start to present the plan to the entire organization. And the CEO of the company stops me and he says, so how many lines of code did you write? And I said, what? And he said, well, everyone here codes and we want to know how many lines of code you wrote in the last 2 days. And amazingly, I had written an entire, I had basically spun up an entire fuzzing infrastructure in a Docker container the day before as part of this and figured out how to integrate it into their CI/CD pipeline. And they didn't give me the job because I wasn't technical enough.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me
Oh my
so
God.
angry.
It was unbelievable. It was absolutely unbelievable. Exactly the same thing that Wolf went through. I was just like, do you know what a C-level executive is?
All right.
Like, I can still write code. Don't get me wrong. But if you're hiring me to write code,
Yeah.
you're not hiring a CISO. You're
No.
hiring a software engineer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
So mine, with a good 4 minutes left before I have to put the kid to bed, and this one, prepare, batten your hatches because you're gonna feel this one in
Ooh,
in
I
your
don't have enough wine.
in your respective loins, and it's gonna hurt. So this is actually right before I got into security. I had done 10 years in IT. I was working at a small regional bank, and they had just gotten acquired, and it was going to be scorched earth. And it was my first time experiencing like about to get laid off, whatever. And it's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, very small, not a smallish city, but I had never experienced anything outside of central Pennsylvania. So I thought that this was going to be the end of the world. So when we acquired a bank, it was scorched earth, right? We had fired everybody, taken over their infrastructure. I got all kinds of free gear, and I was like, I saw what we did to them. It's about to get done to us. And I was panicked, absolutely panicked. So what did I do? Guy on my team who had been a sysadmin, right, for about 15 years. I pretty much, and he had a very impressive resume. He was getting all kinds of interviews and things. I copied his entire resume. I just put my name on it. Oh, yeah, hold on. This is what panic does to you. Like Wolf's face was just like, you're a monster. So I copied his whole thing, and it got me an interview. Like, hell yeah. And I remember, like, I can fake my way through this, right? There's no way they're going to ask me about everything on this resume. They asked every single thing on that. If you put it on your resume, I'm going to look directly at this camera right now. If you put it on your resume, you better be able to back it up. I knew dick, nothing, but he would not let me go. He just kept asking things like, you're going to learn from this. And at the very end, he was like, he just paused, and I was like, well, like, I may have copied my friend's resume, but I do know some of the, and it was an hour and a half of just getting my ass beat. And just, it was the most demoralizing, and I did it, it was a stupid thing. I did it out of panic, but being beat up by somebody who knows you lied because you were scared and yet doesn't give a shit, he's going to teach you a lesson. Oh, God.
Wait, was that with me or Wolf?
No.
By the way, that's what I used to do. I used to just pick something on the candidate's resume and see if they knew anything about it.
I always run into guys like you. God damn it! That expect me
I
to
actually,
know the
one of
things.
the places I will get like really mean with a candidate is if I ask about something on the resume and it sounds like they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and then I had the unmitigated balls to follow up with them a year later to see if they were looking for anybody. What?
Nice.
That's amazing.
I hope that guy's listening. Someday. Oh, he must have just been like, this guy's out of his goddamn mind. So
Okay,
anyway.
so Wolf's got to go. What is his parting words?
Well, I actually have to go too. So, like, what's everybody's parting words?
We're all disappearing.
Whee!
So just to recap, do your homework. Practice. There's plenty of people right now who are bored who will jump on a Zoom and do a practice interview with you. So do your homework. Practice. Have a couple stories at hand that you can share, and give yourself runway to manage your energy and be as present as possible as you can, knowing that Zoom is a really hard way to do these interviews.
Mike.
Everything that Wolf just said. The other one is
Copycat.
Get back to
resume.
Right, exactly. Get back to basics. And the other really important thing that I'm going to hyper emphasize, reread your own resume. And if you put something, if you have IMAP 4 on your resume, expect that the interviewer is going to ask you details about that protocol. Like, go back and reread all those things and make sure that you still actually remember what those acronyms mean.
Joe.
So all of those already, especially make sure you know everything you have on your resume. Other big ones are over communicate when doing technical discussions. Be very cautious about how much you communicate and how candid you are on behavioral discussions for both the same reasons, which is the lack of social cues.
Kathleen.
So take every interview you can get so that you can get practice and get comfortable with this. And also make sure that one of your questions is, what are the next steps and how many steps are there in this process? Because that will help you on your fatigue and energy level. But also realize that you're a big part of the interview. You need to drive the discussion as well. So be sure you know what you want to get out of the interview.
Yeah, that's one of my final thoughts too, is take as many, if you can get interviews. I don't care if you think you have no chance in the world. They're talking to you for some reason. Figure out what that reason is. And when I used to study Kung Fu, my favorite thing we used to do, it was called an iron dummy. It was about 5 feet, middle pole was 5 feet tall. It was about probably 8 inches thick of iron, and it had other iron poles coming off of it. And you would just beat into it to toughen your limbs up, and it worked. Like, the more you did it, and the more forms and stuff that you did on it, toughened up your extremities, toughened up your limbs. You could punch harder, kick harder, and it toughened you up. But then, do it for a while. If I went back and did it now, I would break every bone in my body. So if you don't interview for a long time, you're gonna be a little soft. So take your lumps, take your hits. get reps in regardless, and then you'll feel a little more comfortable each and every time. I want to thank all 4 of you again. My favorite panel so far. I've had you on twice. This is awesome. Thank you, Mike, Joe, Kathleen, Wolf. You guys are amazing. And as always, all of their their tags are on there on Twitter. And thank you guys. It was awesome.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.